what I wanted to talk about, we'll keep the management process bent going for a little bit, and some of the things I'll talk about will be a nice segue into, I think you're going to talk about some monolithic systems and stuff like that. So there's a bit of that in here, but I've been calling this presentation Fluid Teams. What it's basically talking about is how did we plan work and how did we execute effectively as our business grew from what was a starting team of about 5 to 6 folks to where we're at now. And so I'll give you the numbers really quickly. So Betterment founded in 2010, recently a CNBC Disruptor 50, a Crane's Best Place to Work, etc. Today we're at roughly 150 employees, about 145,000 customers, and about 3.9 billion in assets under management, and that's kind of our key metric for our business. It's not actually number of customers, although that's very interesting, but the way that we get measured is the number of assets that we're managing for folks. And as Dan mentioned, we do that is at a fraction of the cost of a traditional financial advisor, and our systems are fully automated. Our website is actually your financial advisor. So here's a picture of that founding team. This is Betterment era 2011. This isn't actually taken in 2011. We did a nice little thing on the roof of our office space about a year ago, and we got everybody together and did kind of classes and took pictures of it. But this was a team that built the launch product, right? And from our perspective, and from most teams' perspectives, this is always kind of seen as a golden era for a startup. This is when it all worked really well. Right? It was direct access to the founders. We're here for the mission. You're sitting across the table from the folks you're working with. And so we kind of always hearken back to this as like, this is the ideal. This is what we want to create for every team in our organization as the company keeps scaling. And how do we do that? Right? And so TLDR, what we're working toward is small mission-driven teams are just generally good. We want to replicate that over time. We don't want to diffuse that. But if you're lucky, this happens. And over time, it goes from a few people that could sit across each other at a desk, and it turns into those 150 folks, 50 of which are engineers, 70 of which are in product development. That's a large organization. That's not a small team. So we were pretty effective as a small team. How do we stay that way as we grow? A few simple goals. So as I lay out some of the things we did, this is not laid out in chronological order. I'm happy to talk to anybody about how these things rolled out. This is kind of a snapshot of how all the pieces fit together. But basically, I had a few goals in mind. One, and most important for me, was that no matter how many people or how many teams, at any given moment in time, we were certain we were working on the thing most important to Betterment as a business, and we were working on it as hard as we possibly could. That thing was going as fast as it could relative to anything else. And that's never one thing. It's a few things, but I didn't want local areas of priority. I didn't want individual agendas dominating just because we had teams in place, right? I wanted to make sure there's a clear system of ownership, right? So really dynamic small teams that you throw together all the time. The drawback of that is you don't know who to go to when something breaks after that team splits apart. So how do you define ownership? And I think there was some ownership conversation in the last presentation that's really interesting is long-term ownership, career path ownership, things like that. I also saw it as interesting for aligning architectural vision. Someone that owns a system gets better at subject matter expertise develops. Also had to be flexible, constant staff changes over time. It's not like we had a burst in hiring and then we stopped and everything settles. This is constant change. I also wanted to make sure we were setting a cadence for the organization. Everybody's running at the same battle rhythm. Every 60 days, we're planning again. So that one team ends at the same time another team ends. Makes it a whole lot easier to think about how do we start the next stuff that we need to do. If teams are always kind of out of sequence with each other, it makes the problem a lot harder. And the last one was extreme transparency on the trade-offs around this system. So that's maybe more than a few goals, but they're good goals, and I'll talk through how we made it happen. So the first place I'll talk about is kind of the org structure, and I'm fast forwarding from that picture of 6 folks to somewhere in the middle of 6 folks and 150 folks. To say, like, we've got enough people that we want to start to define teams. And these teams are pretty classical teams. They're teams that own systems, and these aren't actually our teams today, but Betterment the business, we have a retail product experience that you folks would all come to, and you'd log in and you'd get your, your summary of your accounts, you'd see your performance, things like that. We also trade, we also custody assets, which is basically how we move money around. And we also have a data engineering and analytics team, a BI team, but also powering some of the product. And there's DevOps and tools. So this is a very engineering-centric view. I'm happy to talk more about the product view. It's not a whole lot different up until recently as things continue to specialize, but I figured the audience, we'd want to take more of an engineering-specific view. And the nice thing about this structure, one thing going back to the monolith idea is when I joined, there were 5 engineers on the team and we had a monolithic application. That's not where I wanted the future to lie. I wanted to use a little bit of organizational tension, a little bit of long-term ownership of these systems and applications to help guide architecture, to help pull those systems apart. And so long-term ownership is really valuable to me for a lot of reasons. It defines easy hierarchy of reporting. It also gives us an opportunity to think about incremental investment in the quality of your product, the quality of your systems. The challenge with it is they're silos. They don't work really well when stuff cuts across those teams. It increases the bandwidth of communication required, not decreases it, right? So there's value in it, it's not the right system for all cases. And so what we do is we generate or create pods on a regular cycle. Nothing magical about this idea. This is just a startup that has a goal that's not the original goal of Betterment, but it's a smaller version of that, and it lives for a short period of time. So I've got a little notation over here on the right, retire guide. For those that are customers, you might be familiar with the product. We launched it recently. That team was a pod that was defined out of these home teams, these stable teams, and it had everything within it, not to quote Agile Manifesto, but it had everything in it necessary to achieve that project. All right, and so the question might be, well, all right, so let's jump to, I forgot to put this slide in. So tours of duty. So how does this work? So when you're on a pod, you're only working on that pod's work. You don't have 9 other things that you're doing for the team, for some other person over here. That is your focus. And when you're not on a pod, you're back to your home team and you're making that team better. Whether that's in the code, that's team processes, that's whatever it is, but you're an owner of those systems. And so it's a nice also separation of concerns, opportunity to focus on a problem with a group of people. Also, it really was a nice layer of abstraction for dynamic growth. I can add individuals to the organization, and as long as I'm creating pods at a regular cadence, I don't really have to worry about defining these teams perfectly every step of the way. I also am not constraining, sorry, I keep flipping. I won't constrain this retail team necessarily to building only what they're capable of building with the people that are a part of that team. I actually have the whole organization, the whole engineering organization available to me, to the company, to deliver whatever we need to deliver as fast as possible, because pods ride on top of this long-term structure. So it's a nice little abstraction. So how do we do this? So now to jump a little bit to the process piece. And I've actually got a demo in here that I can show you how this actually runs. So we took a little inspiration from a Pandora post that a lot of you may be aware of. I'll give you the Cliff's Notes. Basically, you take a person per month, and that person is worth $5. And you estimate projects in dollars. And the way they used it was a prioritization mechanism. We don't use it for a prioritization mechanism. We have a separate way of dealing with prioritization that's not included in here. But I thought it was neat. I thought it was interesting, but I also kind of squinted at it like this feels a lot like capacity planning. And I don't know if I'm a fan of that. But the thing that was most interesting to me was the market dynamics of it. Back to that goal of transparency, one of the things that gets difficult as teams grow quickly is making sure that everybody's aware of the trade-offs for why a decision was made. Why is somebody working on that? Why is that thing the most important? Why couldn't we squeeze in project number 11 and we only have 10 going right now? Why? And so this was interesting for me to say, like, okay, if we take this dynamic, this simple mechanism of estimating in dollars, maybe we can create a marketplace out of this. And so we built an auction. And basically what we do is we take the same ground rules, but we're not using it for prioritization, we're using it for broad resource allocation. And so the ground rules are generally this: a person per month is equal to $5. Estimates are delivered in dollars. If you spend more than 15 minutes on your estimate, you spent 10 minutes too long. So like as quick and rough an estimate as you can pull off. Team leads and product owners are actually, we're a finance company, so we have a room called the pit. You don't have to have one, but team leads and product owners are in the pit. Everybody could play along, but there's roles to play within this. And team leads that own those silos that we talked about before, those home teams, or they're the manager of those teams, they keep the dollars. And the product owners are key influencers on where those dollars should go. And so, like I said before, priority isn't the name of the game for us. At this point, we've moved beyond that. We have a different way to choose priority. But priority is a moving, it's not to reuse the word, but it's fluid within this meeting. There is some horse trading. There's a little bit of negotiation. Some things fit in, some things don't. And the other ground rule is we're going to do this in 60 days. Whatever you've got on the list should fit in 60 days, to the best of your ability. And so the first time we did this, we took simple printouts of every project that we wanted to do and put them up on the wall and printed out dollars, literal dollars per team, and the teams all went through and put those dollars up. And it was kind of magical to see the conversations and the trade-offs and all of that being, it's so transparent to everybody doing it that everyone that was doing that walked out of the room and knew exactly why those projects were the most important projects for us and exactly why the other projects didn't make the cut. Made my job a hell of a lot easier. So, video. So now we need to throw a little technology at this. Paper on the wall, that was the first cut of it. So we actually built a spreadsheet, simple Google Doc spreadsheet, and I can show it to you here. Are we still doing it? So basically, and I got to be careful with, that's a little too current. Let's go back. So basically, and I think this might even be the one that we're going to run through, we've evolved this to, you can see, if everybody can see it, you can see, we've got these kind of home teams over here. We've got rough head count. You'll see 0.5 in there. That's somebody playing around with someone onboarding. And then there's just, it's capacity. It's easy, right? And we exclude some individuals from it. But then we also have a list of all the projects that we'd like to accomplish. And these projects are things that are bottom up. They're things that teams have suggested. They're also a little bit top down. There's stuff that we just need to get done. There's links to specifications and things like that so you can get at it. But the real meat of the auction lives in this spreadsheet, which I'll pop up a video in a second, where each team has a certain number of dollars to spend, but the goal is to spend it first from top down, right? So we're working from top down priority, and when we get into spots where we can't finish it all, or we can't support everything, then there's a little bit of horse trading. So I thought it would be fun to, rather than me talk about it, I'll pop up a little video. Is that gonna work? Whoops. Did I break it? I'll go back. We'll just do it from here. And I've got it at 4x playback so that this might be fun. So just watch on the right. So that I got lucky. That was actually the same planning. So what you got to imagine is we've already gone through and we've talked about all the projects. They've been pitched by all the product owners. We've talked about the estimates. That takes about 30 minutes. For the whole list. And now everybody's broken up into smaller teams that are that team lead and that product owner and maybe a couple of other interested folks that want to nudge people around in the horse trading, and they're putting in the dollars. I have nothing to do with this. Each team is essentially voting for, so there's a little bit of like, we believe this is as important as you all believe it is, executive team, and they're putting their dollars in. And the thing that I love about it is that the investment cuts across those silos, right? So like there's somebody on the data team that really wants to build something within the retail application. They want to roll up their sleeves and learn a little Rails. Why not? Let's bring them over. Just put your $5 in that slot and leave it up to the team lead to decide that that individual should be a part of that team. And they're going to bring unique skills. So there's a nice eddy current in the organization of knowledge sharing that I don't have to organize. I don't have to push it. It happens naturally because we're creating these pods. So everything on a row becomes a pod that'll live for 60 days. Now, some of these are just milestones for bigger projects, and these epics that go from like 60 day to 60 day will have different teams. That pod, the composition of it will change over time. The home team is stable. Everybody goes back home to retail, goes back home to wherever they're gonna go if they come out of a pod. And so you walk out of the room and everyone can walk out to the rest of the organization, all 150 folks, and explain why these are the projects and why these are the things that we're doing. And it's kind of fun to watch too. On a day that we have the auction, there's probably 75 people logged into the spreadsheet just watching it happen. Spreadsheet's probably gonna break down sometime. Anybody knows software that does this? Great, but it kind of works, right? It's simple and it kind of works. So, so that's what we've got going. I'll pop back to my slides. So I figured I'd show the video a little bit. So one thing that I didn't talk about that folks might be thinking about is everybody up in the air every 60 days? And no, not everybody is. So there's this idea of what we've come to call prime teams, kind of a riff on Amazon Prime. I don't know where it came from, but it stuck. So these are dedicated to the home team. This is where this is like that tour of duty idea. There's a certain allocation that we try to keep dedicated to these home teams because we don't want to go to zero. You can call it, Amazon calls it keeping the lights on. There's issues and defects and technical debt that might fit into there. There's also incremental improvement and refinement on product we've launched in the past, right? So what we're looking at in the auction is net new stuff, stuff we haven't built before. Sorry, I guess I should go back to present. And so the rough numbers, about 40-60. But somewhere between 20 to 40% depending on the stage of the company, what we were trying to build, and those sorts of things. So I've drawn it down. This is I control this for better or worse. So I've drawn it down a little bit at times. And so current state is we've been running this way for about a year. We've launched 2 new lines of business. We've re-platformed our retail application onto Rails, away from a Java, Spring MVC, MySQL stack. We've added 80,000 customers. We've doubled the size of the company. These numbers are wrong, 150 people. And we've done all that by, not specifically because we had this process, but I do think that this structure and this process has made it more easy, more fluid to be able to grow like that. So I had a little note for myself to check time. How much time? Keep going? All right. Does anybody care about what's next? Is that interesting? Okay. So this worked for a long time, a year and a half almost. But it's starting to break down a little bit right now. And why it's breaking down right now is we actually have 3 lines of business. We have some strong stakeholders that need to plan roadmaps for a line of business. So the variability that used to be a benefit is now becoming a little bit of a negative for those individuals and those teams. So we need to adjust a bit. The other thing is we all know in this room, skills are not totally fungible. You can't go grab somebody from the other side of the organization and say, build this thing. Things were more fungible early on. They're still a bit fungible within certain teams, but they're not broadly across the whole organization. So we need to model that a little bit. So how do we plan to adjust? We are going to provide more certainty on resources. I got a drawing in a second to talk about that. We're probably going to adjust the cadence. So originally we did this every 60 days. That was totally arbitrary. I thought 30 days was too frequent, 90 days was too long, so I made it up. And it worked really well for us because it actually gave us a little bit of a steer moment within a quarter. But now that we have lines of business and businesses kind of run on a quarterly cadence, we're probably going to flip it over to a 90-day cycle. And that'll just change the dynamics of how big things are within. We also operate the business now, back to this idea of we don't use the dollars for priority. We run the organization off of an OKR framework, which I'll assume folks know about. Let's call it KPIs if you're not familiar with it. And basically we want to make sure we're tying back this investment. The beautiful thing about this system is that I know exactly how many dollars are going towards projects, and I know projects are tied to OKRs. Now I know ROI against OKR. with one extra column in my spreadsheet. So we're going to tie those back to OKRs to get a little bit more transparency in how are we supporting the business. And then we'll do prioritization based on more formal ROI. But the real change is we're going to stop with just purely dedicated versus variable, and there's going to be this reservation pool. And the idea behind the reservation pool is that these teams, these home teams, have now gotten large enough, because we've grown the organization, that they can support roadmap on their own. They don't need help on everything. They need help on those things that cut across those teams. And so the reservation is, this is the head count, the capacity that never goes away. We'll never draw down unless there's, I don't know, we want to build another line of business. But if we want to really, focus effort on something, you can commit to 5 engineers and 2 product managers and a designer on your team for the year, and that's not going to change. We're not going to be that dynamic. But there's always going to be a piece that is variable, right? Like if we want to deliver something that's beneficial to multiple lines of business that touch all applications and all aspects of our stack, everybody's got to pay their tariff, so to speak. So there is a variable piece where there's always going to be a part of the organization that's fully dynamic. But we'll continue to create pods, and we'll continue to use that mechanism of short-lived focus teams that are either driven by a project or an objective, a goal, and measure it on that. We really like that piece of the system. So I got a bunch of other stuff that I could talk about, but I'm happy to answer questions. This was just a drawing of pods collaborating on a project. Anyway, so that's my shtick. Any questions from anybody? Thanks. Yeah.
So you make the distinction between the ongoing work, which is like a known property, and then keep scaling it, make sure you're constantly new work.
Yep.
Can you talk about, is there a sense of sometimes the pods are trying to product initiative that once later turns out it's a terrible idea, give you the results you wanted, or a smaller group of teams?
I don't know if I could share a specific example, but I can share that.
Summarize the question if you could.
Oh, sorry. Is there an example of a pod that after 2 months didn't produce results?
I guess it's you don't you're asking them to build a thing. How are you thinking about the sort of the experimental or quote-unquote need?
Right. Yeah. So the pod would actually own ahead of creating the pod. We'd have some sort of a case around what is the experiment we're trying to run. If it's an incremental, if it's an optimization on existing product, let's say that it's purely an optimization on our sign-up flow, and it's something, and there's a threshold that's hard to define, but we kind of we know it when we feel it, if this is a project or a pod, or this is something that should fit within the team. But there's definitely pod work that has kicked off a riskier bet that we've decided after we've seen the first couple of iterations of that bet that we've shut it down. But in most cases, we're promising at least 60 days to make good on that bet, right? And so I guess that comes more back to the objectives and KR's framework of how do we measure that the pod is doing well, and it's setting up specific key results, specific measures for the milestones of that project. And we always have those as a part of our management framework on the project. We think we'll see this launched by this time, or we think we'll see these assets roll in because of this feature. And we're always rolling something out minimal to test that, to see if we keep investing further. And that's the nice thing about the pod. It makes it easy because it's not so disruptive, right? We're not shutting down a team that people feel an identity for. We're shutting down something that everybody knew was going to be short-lived. Yeah.
So it's interesting comparing what you're talking about and what Evan was talking about.
Yeah.
I put the two together.
Yeah.
You're creating these pods, and the pods to be effective, or to be optimally effective, would have to have this psychological safety on that. So what do you do to encourage that? Because it's a short-term team. Yep. It's obviously team chemistry matters.
Yep.
And personalities matter.
Yeah. So I think the answer to that is that there's no pod of strangers, right? So we have other structures within the organization to make sure that everybody knows everybody else We created a structure called bands, where new hires are added to a band, like a rock band, and they get to know people that are from across the organization, right? So outside of function and things like that. We always make sure that there's somebody that's added to a pod that also has leadership aspirations. And they don't have to be a tech lead, but there's somebody that like, this is interesting for me, and they've shown the traits that we might look for somebody to fill that role. And their role is to create a little bit of that safety. Now, we're still small enough that there isn't too much anonymity across the organization. I think that might be more of an issue as we grow, but the last point I'd make is back to that growing pain of the pooling, of like, skills aren't totally fungible. Roughly the same group of people are working together in some cycle over time. So there are platoons that are all working together. I hate to use the military analogy, but there are big groups of people that are all kind of like skills are similar, and they're generally working together more often, right? So it's never a whole pod of total strangers, and I think that helps. Where should I go next? Yeah.
Who owns the output from the pod when it was found?
The product that was built, where does it go?
They built something.
The home team. That's why those home teams exist. So if we build, tax loss harvesting is a thing that, that's too, well, so basically what it is if you have losses in your account, we're going to automatically harvest those losses. That's something that cut across the entire stack, right? There's a retail experience to it and the product experience. There's trading changes, there's custodial changes, there was data engineering changes, data warehouse changes. A team came together, changed over time, so multiple versions of a pod over time. When that project disbanded, the retail team owns the user experience of tax loss harvesting. The trading team owns the trading guts of it. And there were elements, people from all of those teams involved in the initial project. So nobody got handed a thing that they didn't have any idea what was going on during the process and said, now you own this, right? So people from those home teams were in the pods, and then they carry back to the systems that they own the thing that they built and make it better over time.
All right, one more thing.
Yep. Back right.
So maybe I'm taking the auction metaphor a little too seriously. What are people's payoff functions? What leads people to vote for anything besides, like, I want to work on X, or I want to work on Y?
So there is a little personal, and that's fine. There's a little bit of like, this is the thing I'm most interested in. I'd really like to see this get the dollars. And influence isn't a bad thing in an organization. Not everything has an optimization function that we can wrap around it. But the incentive is that we've had a good conversation about those projects that are in priority, and hopefully have done a good job of describing why those things are most important and why they're most important to the mission of Betterment. So I think it's that folks are mission-oriented first, and are taught from the time they come into the organization to focus on those things that are beneficial to Betterment before those things that might be personal. There's also some piece of we make sure that there's an opportunity, there's a pressure release valve for making your own day better. It's not in this process. This doesn't catch everything. So like you want to make your own development process more efficient, you want to do a pet project, etc. There's opportunities for that too. Right, so you do need to have those. This was very much focused on how do you make sure your business is executing the things that make it survive or allow it to survive and grow. And then those other things, I think, were more a part of the first presentation. Do we have time for one more?
One more.
Okay, up front.
I noticed in the guy at the top, I guess the engineering leader, I'm going to assume he kind of has the architectural vision for that product set.
He carries some of it. I don't want to interrupt you. Is that yeah?
The pod, is it empowered to deviate from that? I mean,
Yes.
how do you resolve that tension?
It's a good question.
The team accepts back what the pod creates.
Yep, so I'll paraphrase is how do we maintain architectural alignment if we're creating pods that are working independent from a team leader? if they're carrying the architectural vision. So the team leader doesn't carry the architectural vision for their team independently. We do have some folks in the organization that are tasked with thinking about architecture. But we also have built a design review process that harkens to this a little bit. It's very similar, where if there's something of significant change being introduced by a pod, it needs to be submitted to public design review. So Socratic method, we want that idea, that design, lightly documented and subjected to questioning of how does it fit with the other things that we want to do. And that gives that team lead, it gives my director of architecture, it gives me the opportunity to go in and ask questions and nudge, right? But it's on that team to design it. And that's an opportunity for folks that haven't done that before to pull that together. Now, they're not flying blind and they're not on their own. Those other structures that exist can definitely lend a hand in the process, but that team owns putting up that design review. And so it's lightweight, and like I said, there's a threshold. It's not everything they do. There's some things that we trust, but there is a certain threshold for net new or unique design that's subjected to that.
All right, Dustin,
Cool.
thank you very much. That was amazing.